have switched over to yard farming, partially because, it's difficult sometimes dealing with customers. And it's very tiring just constantly putting in new gardens and never really like working on a big project. So I started nanny goat farms and I do yard farms, and it's very similar to spin agriculture. I don't use their business plan, but I do barter pieces of land, unused pieces of land from people in exchange for vegetables and paying for the water. So I meter how much water I use, and my farms range anywhere from, like, I don't know, 10 by 20 to an eighth or a quarter of an acre. So very varying amounts of growth there. So, okay, that was the background of urban agriculture, and now all of you are convinced that urban agriculture is really cool and important, right? Okay, so how do you do it? And this is the basic part, right? So each one of you probably knows of a spot that's sunny that you could be growing something in, or that maybe an urban farmer could be growing something in. And so I want to talk about how easy it is to really get started, what basic knowledge you really need, and then everything else you can find in a book or through a friend or online, something like that. So first you have to do is you have to find a spot. And you can find one that you personally own, could be your backyard. You could rent, you could barter. You just have to have sun 8 hours a day. It could be your patio, it could be your rooftop. Just find a spot, because urban agriculture is absolutely, it could be anything at all. And the next thing you want to do is you want to test that spot. You can send off for soil tests. It costs about $30 if you want to get a formal test from the plant and soil labs in Houston. Or you can test it yourself, or you can just play in the dirt and see what it looks like and kind of start from there. And darn, my slides are not showing up for some reason. The next thing you need to do is you need to plan that spot. You need to start with a sketch. You need to know that you can't really do beds wider than 4 feet because you can only reach in 4 feet, 2 feet from each side. You need to think about where the paths are going to be, because you want to have paths and everything. That's the biggest problem I found with people starting to do urban farms. They'll just like get a tiller and till a giant square and think they can just plant seeds everywhere. And I'm like, have you thought about a stepstone or a path of some sort? Because you want to walk in there. So those are all things to think about and to play and to dig in that soil and see how deep you can go. Then you have to prepare the soil. And this is the most important part, especially if you have something like Bermuda grass, which is horribly invasive and difficult to deal with if you're a gardener. And ways that you can do it is solarizing. If you want to plan like a season ahead, you can solarize your soil and just clear plastic, and you lay it out in the sun and you let it cook until it gets real hot. You can leave it on for months and just to wait till it kills all the weeds and the weed seeds inside that soil. Doesn't always work, because a lot of times when you put down that plastic, it becomes shady outside for about a month. So I would recommend praying before you do it. And then also you can start with just newspaper, put newspaper down and then cardboard on top of it, just layer, 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 so you can block out all the sun and keep any weeds from growing in that area, and water it all in so it becomes really moist, and just leave it like that and let it decompose for as long as it wants to decompose. It could be, most of the time the season is a good time to start in advance, but you could do it 3 days before. So that's a really important thing about planning your garden, is just thinking about how you're going to deal with what's there. You also, if you're planning on digging in your garden, you're going to want to pre-soak the ground, because it's very difficult to dig into extremely dry ground. So you want to soak like the day before, like maybe just stick a fork in and make some holes in the area that you want, and then just let it soak real good with water so it's easier to dig. You don't want it real wet when you're digging, but a pre-soak will let you dig like twice as deep. It's incredible. And then you need to plan your compost pile. Composting, really basic. Pretty much everyone knows how to do it nowadays. So I remember quite a few years ago when it would be really novel to, I'm going to have a compost pile. It's this new thing. Granted, everyone's been doing it since the beginning of time, but it's become a lot more popular to have urban compost piles. They sell little pre-made urban compost bins that you can buy. They're really expensive and completely unnecessary. So what you could do is you could just put 3 pallets together, or maybe you have a dog, so you put 1 pallet leaned up on the front side and take it away each time you need to turn your compost. You could use chicken wire. You could, if you don't have a dog, you could just make a pile. It's really easy. It doesn't stink. Not really very many vermin. Maybe a little bit of roaches sometimes, but for the most part, it's never going to smell bad, and it's not really going to attract anything. The key also is that you need to have more carbon, which is the brown stuff. less nitrogen, which is the green stuff, and a good amount of water so that the texture feels like a Roundup sponge. And you just start by taking your kitchen scraps and then putting some leaves on top of it, putting a little water, and leaving it there for a while. A lot of people never turn their compost. It means you'll wait a couple months before you get anything ready, but you don't have to mess with it. So a lot of people don't even use their compost. They don't even have gardens, they still have compost piles. So this is the part when I tell you to dig in, and there are different ways that you can dig in. I have done a lot of double digging in my time. If you read organic gardening books, they're starting to naysay double digging as a waste of energy. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, and I don't know if it's a waste yet. I haven't decided, and maybe I can ask you guys that if any of you have tried other methods besides double digging. Double digging, and I should have like a little image of this. Double digging means that, okay, so you have your pre-designed row, and the row, you're going to chop a piece of the row, you're going to dig down, and you're going to remove that dirt, and then you're going to loosen up another foot down. So you're going 2 feet down. The first foot you take up and you put it off to the side to use later. Then you loosen another foot down. And then you go to the next chunk, and you take that first foot and you flip it in on the original spot that you loosened up. And then you dig another foot down. So you're turning the soil, you're having an opportunity to weed, especially if you have Bermuda grass. This works really well because the roots will go at least 2 feet down. And so it's real easy then to make sure you're getting all the root matter, to make sure that those weeds don't grow back. It's very backbreaking, labor intensive. You want to get your friends over for that for sure. You don't want to do that by yourself. It takes a long time. But pre-soaking is really important for double digging because about a foot, with the drought that we had, I tried to double dig this summer and it was like hitting rock, but it was just dried soil. And after this rain, and I can go in there like butter. It's so nice. You just go in there and turn it up. But that's double digging. That's one way to do it. And the reason that's supposed to be better than tilling is as a tiller will actually go down a certain depth, depending on the tiller that you have, and then it will leave like a caked layer where the rototillers are hitting, right? And so that's going to be really hard for root growth to go through that caked layer. And that's why there's a lot of movements that are no-till because of that. There are some good alternatives that I've tried or that I've seen tried where you can till, and then you kind of like shovel away what you till, and then you take a fork and you loosen up that hard layer that you just made. And that does save a little bit of the backbreaking labor as well. The only problem is those tillers. If you got Bermuda grass and you're cutting that grass up with those tillers, each little root piece will become a new Bermuda grass. So each time you chop it, so you take a Bermuda root and you chop it 10 times, that's 10 new Bermuda roots you have to deal with. So that's why double digging when you're doing, or solarizing really well beforehand is absolutely essential. It is a pain in the butt. But this is a picture of a double digging workshop that I did at someone's house. And we had like 15 people show up, and we were able to dig an entire garden in like an hour. So if you have some hands, you need a digging fork and you need a shovel, and maybe a wheelbarrow, because that first chunk that you take out, you're going to wait until you finish a row, and then you're going to stick that chunk back in at the other side of the row. So depending on how long your rows are, you might need a wheelbarrow to transport that. But like I said, organic gardening is naysaying it. So you can listen to me saying, double digging is awesome, it's backbreaking, but you will get a good workout, you don't need to go to the gym. That's for sure. Okay, so then you've planned your garden, you've maybe solarized your garden, you've now double dug or you've tilled your garden. Maybe you've done none of that and you just put the plant straight in the ground. You can try that too if you've got good soil. What do you do next? Well, you have to talk about maybe amending your soil, what kind of things your soil might need. In general, you should know that our Texas soils are really alkalinic, which means that we can use as much acidity as possible because vegetables like acidic soil, and we have alkalinic soil because of the limestone. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing too is to think about what kind of natural fertilizers you want to use, and to decipher what kind of fertilizers. You need to talk about the N, the P, and the K. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Nitrogen is like, if you put nitrogen in, things grow really quickly, they're really green, it's all about foliage. If you put a lot of phosphorus in, you're working on root growth and you're working on blossoms. So if you're doing flowers, you want to have more phosphorus versus vegetables maybe with nitrogen. And then, you've got your K, which is just kind of an extra bump, like, woohoo, we don't really know what you're good for, but you're good for everything. No, but really, it's good for everything. And then, of course, there's other important things that you should think about adding into your soil as well. But those are the ones that gardening pretty much talks about. So things that you definitely want to consider adding. If you're breaking ground on a grassy area, you're going to need compost. Grass does add a layer of humus, but it just really doesn't have the organic matter that gardens need. So compost is one of the first things that I would put in the ground if I were you. And I usually, if I've started a compost pile at the same time I started planting the garden, I normally have to buy that first round of compost. Okay, you know, I'll go get a truckload of compost because mine's not going to be ready for a couple months. So I definitely like recommend buying some compost and putting it in there, or borrowing your friend's compost pile that they're not using. Worm castings come from worm composting, and they're 10 times better than normal compost. They're just 10 times harder to get, and also you don't get as much of them.